Lord, the light of your love is shining in the midst of the darkness shining. Jesus, light of the world, shine upon us. Set us free by the truth you now bring us. Shine on me. Shine on me. Shine, Jesus, shine. Fill this land with the Father's glory. Blaze, Spirit, blaze. Set our hearts on fire. Flow, river, flow. Flood the nations with grace and mercy. Send forth your word, Lord, and let there be light.
Good morning and welcome to Let the Bible Speak. My name is Alex Meredith. I am the minister for the Marquette Church of Christ here in the Central UP in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Really glad you're here and welcome to this study that we are right in the middle of. We are in the middle of the study, but it should be really easy to pick up into if you've not been following along already. We're talking about the crown, the early years of the Israelite monarchy, the lives of Saul and David, and we're really looking at and thinking about this idea of godly leadership and what that doesn't look like and what that does look like. And we're sort of in this transition phase in the narrative where we're slowly moving away from Saul and moving a little closer to David, but both of them are still very active participants in this narrative right now. So we've talked so far about Saul's appointment as the first king of Israel. We've talked about several of his mistakes that he made along the way and what good leadership and godly leadership does not look like. Then we talked about his rejection and David's subsequent anointing as the next king of Israel. Last week we even talked about David and Goliath, this moment where David, through God, conquered this giant behemoth of a warrior in Goliath and allowed the Israelites to conquer the Philistines. And following that phase and that period, what we see is that David's getting a lot of public recognition. In fact, there's even a little statement at the very end of that narrative where people were singing a song about David and Saul begins to get jealous. So David is growing in popularity and Saul's popularity is declining. Now, that's where we are. And today we're really going to be talking about these topics of respect and reverence. And when you think about respect and reverence, it really seems to me that if you think about where the modern world is, really, I think it's lost its respect for all things divine, sacred, and holy. Maybe you agree with me, right? There's a growing vandalism problem at different churches across the United States. They are being vandalized at an increased rate with hateful words, crude drawings, swastikas, symbols of satanic worship being plastered on the walls of these buildings. You hear OMG all the time. I'm not going to say it, but oh my, I'm taking the name of the Lord in vain. All of that's common language now, right? And I don't think it's often done in the context of prayer. I could be wrong about that. We have this growing rejection of authority and different authority systems. You think about the way that the understanding of family has evolved, right? This system between parents and children, it's not the same as it once was. The relationship between law enforcement and a community, it's not the same as it once was. Even political leaders and the constituency, it's not what it once was, right? All of these different systems of authority breaking down, and all of it is indicative of a culture not only that doesn't care about authority, but that doesn't care about God's design in general, because those two things correspond with one another. Sometimes they directly relate to another, right? Because our treatment of our parents and our submission to them is actually a way in which we show our submission and respect for God. But in general, the breakdown of respect for authority is going to coincide with our general lack of respect for God, because that's the way people's attitudes change regarding authority. Now, evidence of irreverence is everywhere, right? It's all over the place. And I would say that to some degree, time has changed. In one way, there's nothing new under the sun, as the book of Ecclesiastes puts it. People have always been irreverent, but it's a lot more accepted now, right? I don't know that you could have gotten away with OMG 50 years ago, right? It's just different. There is this tradition in Orthodox Judaism. I found this really interesting, and so I wanted to share it with you. In Orthodox Judaism, anytime you write out the word God for any reason, we normally write it, right, G-O-D. In Orthodox Judaism, the tradition is you write G-D. G-D. And the reasoning behind this is because it's a sense in which by writing down the name of God, we cannot fully capture or fully represent in any sort of fair way the wholeness of who God really is. It's almost an unfair representation of Him. Now, there are a lot of things I disagree with Orthodox Jews about, but that's a really powerful statement that tradition makes. It's a sign of reverence. It's a sign of respect. A sign of respect that is just in very short supply today. And I'm not saying we need to adopt that practice, but we certainly need to change something, right? So last week, we talked about David and Goliath. In the aftermath of all of that, Saul is very jealous. And as his jealousy increases, Saul becomes almost more and more manic and unpredictable. At one point, David is playing the harp to try to soothe Saul, and Saul takes a spear and throws it at him, and it narrowly misses David's head. So Saul begins pursuing David, seeking his life, seeking to kill him. And he's caught on by now. This is going to be the next king of Israel. And so he's trying to kill him. And he is in this all-out pursuit. David is on the run, and that is where we encounter the text that we're going to be reading today, 1 Samuel chapter 24, verses 1 through 11. So let's read this together. 1 Samuel 24, 1 through 11. When Saul returned from following the Philistines, he was told, "Behold, David is in the wilderness of En-gedi." And Saul took 3,000 chosen men out of all Israel, and went to seek David and his men in front of the wild goats' rocks. And he came to the sheepfolds by the way, where there was a cave, and Saul went in to relieve himself. Now David and his men were sitting in the innermost parts of the cave, and the men of David said to him, "Here is the day of which the Lord said to you, Behold, I will give you your enemy into your hand, and you shall do to him as it shall seem good to you." Then David arose and stealthily cut off a corner of Saul's robe. And afterward, David's heart struck him, because he had cut off a corner of Saul's robe. He said to his men, "The Lord forbid that I should do this thing to my Lord, the Lord's anointed, to put out my hand against him, seeing he is the Lord's anointed." So David persuaded his men with these words, and did not permit them to attack Saul. And Saul rose up and left the cave and went on his way. Afterward, David also arose and went out of the cave and called after Saul, my Lord the king." And when Saul looked behind him, David bowed with his face to the earth and paid homage. And David said to Saul, "Why do you listen to the words of men who say, 'Behold, David seeks you harm'? Behold, this day your eyes have seen how the Lord gave you today into my hand in the cave. And some told me to kill you, but I spared you. I said, I will not put out my hand against my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed. See, my father, see the corner of your robe in my hand. For the fact that I cut off the corner of your robe and did not kill you, you may know and see there is no wrong or treason in my hands. I have not sinned against you, though you hunt my life to take it." That is a really powerful passage with a really profound message. So at the beginning of the passage, we see that Saul is pursuing David. He finds out where David is in the wilderness of En-Gedi, it says. And his men are pursuing David's men. Each of them has a band of followers with them. It says that Saul had a few thousand men with him, so he's got a small army. David, we know, had a pretty sizable group of men as well. And Saul's men come pretty close to where David is, and without realizing it, Saul goes into this cave where David and his men they're in the back part of that cave, right? So they hear some sort of disturbance toward the entrance. They look, it's Saul. I mean, talk about what seems to be a coincidence, I should say. Talk about a situation that seems divinely orchestrated. I mean, what better opportunity for David to take the life of the man who's pursuing him? And you've got to think for a second, if I were in this situation, what would I do, right? What kind of character would I have? Or you might even ask, what would any sane person do if they had the opportunity to stop the threat to their life, the person who's made life chaos for them, and to stop fleeing and make it so much easier on themselves? What would any sane person do? They'd probably do something worse than David did. They'd probably kill him, harm him, embarrass him, taunt him, something, right? But here's what David chooses to do. He goes up to Saul while he's apparently sitting down, and he gets close enough to him to cut off a corner of his robe, right? He's got this little corner of his robe as proof, right? He shows Saul, look, I could have killed you. And that's exactly what he does. As soon as Saul leaves the cave, David confronts him and says, look, you're seeking my life, but I had the opportunity to kill you and I didn't. Saul is astonished. He ends up leaving at the end of all of this and saying, okay, I'll stop pursuing you for now. But he's absolutely astonished. It's a mixture of guilt and astonishment, right? Because on one hand, you see at the end of verse 16, it says, and Saul lifted up his voice and wept, right? He was tremendously guilty for what he had done because he recognizes his character compared to David's, who spared his life. And then later on in verse 19, Saul's kind of thinking through this. He says, for if a man finds his enemy, will he let him go away safe? Right? It's senseless. In a way, that's sort of the love that God calls us to. The kind of love that is not personally advantageous in any way. The kind of love that is totally self-sacrificial, right? The kind of love that other people look at it and they go, why on earth would you do that? The other day in our Wednesday night Bible class, we were talking about how that's what happens when you have kids, actually. How having kids in many ways doesn't make sense because it's not personally advantageous to you. Why would somebody do that? And the only real motivation that we could come up with was because you love them, right? Because of love. You show your love to them and you care about them, and right? It's not for any sort of personal advantage, which is the way that the world generally tends to operate. It operates off of this formula of what can I get out of it. That's not the way that God calls us to respond to the world and the people around us. He calls us to respond in almost a senseless way, but really a loving way. Love that is so radical that it doesn't make sense. Love that is so radical that it really catches people's attention. That's what David did here. So, what's the message here? What does the cut off piece of cloth represent? I think it represents respect, and it represents reverence for God. Now, there's something very notable about the fact that David, he chose mercy over revenge. That's some of what we just talked about, right? It's very reflective of what happens to Jesus on the cross, right? Jesus on the cross and on his way to the cross, and that whole passion narrative of him being arrested and being tortured and being mocked and ridiculed, carrying his cross, and then being on the cross. That whole time, you and I know that he had the power to retaliate, the power to get down, the power to get out of that situation, but he chose mercy instead. And that's what David does here. He had the opportunity and the power to take revenge. He had the power to get out of it, but he chose mercy instead. So there's something certainly very powerful about that. We don't need to overlook that. But the real story here is the fact that David has this tremendous respect for God. He couldn't bring himself to defy God's design. That's really what we see here in verse 6. Notice the way David phrases this. The Lord forbid that I should do this thing to my Lord, the Lord's anointed, right? To put out my hand against him, seeing he is the Lord's anointed. David had so much respect for God's design. He had so much respect for the system that God had put in place. He was very apprehensive about, and he would not bring himself to defy it or to mess it up. He couldn't bring himself to do it. Instead, what we see in verse 12 is that he entirely leaves the justice and Saul's punishment. He leaves all of that stuff in God's hands. Look at verse 12. May the Lord judge between me and you. May the Lord avenge me against you, but my hand shall not be against you. And that's something really interesting. It's not that he believed that Saul didn't deserve punishment. It's not that he believed that Saul was innocent. It's just that he had so much respect for the position, he wasn't going to do it himself, right? And he wasn't going to defy God's design. So that cut piece of cloth, it represents respect, the kind of respect that's in short supply today. And again, his act of mercy, it's not based on his opinion of Saul's personality. It's not based on his opinion of Saul's righteousness. It's based on Saul's position as God's anointed. And God's design is important, and David respected that. That is exactly why in 2 Samuel chapter 1, when David hears the news about the death of Saul and his son Jonathan, of course he's good friends with Jonathan, and understandably he grieved the loss of Jonathan, his friend, but he's also grieving the loss of Saul. In fact, somebody gets punished and killed for overseeing the death of Saul and Jonathan and not doing anything about it. And it all ties back to David's respect of this position that God has appointed, right? It didn't so much have to do with Saul's character as it did the fact that God put him there. You don't have to respect a person to respect a position. I want to turn to a passage. This is in 1 Peter chapter 2. 1 Peter chapter 2. 1 Peter is towards the very end of your Bible, just before the last few books, after the book of Hebrews. 1 Peter chapter 2, I'm going to read from verses 13 through 17. Listen to what this says about the way that we react and respond to people in authority that God has placed. So 1 Peter 2:13, be subject for the Lord's sake, right? This is a way we show our reverence to God. Be subject for the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether it be to the emperor as supreme, or to governors as sent by him to punish those who do evil and to praise those who do good. For this is the will of God, that by doing good you should put to silence the ignorance of foolish people. Live as people who are free, not using your freedom as a cover-up for evil, but living as servants of God. Honor everyone, love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the emperor. There's a very similar passage in Romans chapter 13. We're not going to read it right now. But it also talks about respecting these human institutions that God has put in place. And the emphasis in Romans 13 actually is the fact that God put them there, right? God placed them there for a reason. And sure, maybe they decide not to follow God's design. There are world leaders all over the world right now who were put there by God, who had the opportunity to follow God's design and are not, right? But Romans 13 tells us that God has put them there. And God has put them there for a reason, right? And we have this command both in Romans 13 and in 1 Peter 2 to show respect to people in those positions. Now, what's really remarkable is here, by the time of 1 Peter, by the time that 1 Peter was written, if I remember my dates correctly, this is going to be sometime, I think, in the 80s AD, which in 81 AD, you have the beginning of the reign of Emperor Domitian. Now, Emperor Domitian was not an emperor with the most pro-Christian agenda. Emperor Domitian was cruel. He was vicious. He was incredibly corrupt. His whole administration was, you could say. He was responsible himself for widespread Christian persecution, right? So if Peter can say, honor the emperor, if he could say that about Domitian, what do you think that says about our political leaders today? What do you think it says about our bosses at work, or our parents, or any of the other systems of authority that have been designed by God? Ephesians 5 and 6 talks quite a bit about these systems of authority. It talks about the system of authority between a husband and wife. It talks about the system of authority between children and their parents. It talks about the system of authority between a master and his servants. Some people relate that to a boss and his employees even, right? You look at all of these different systems of authority and you think, if Peter can say that about Domitian, then what should our attitude be towards all these other people in our lives that we are in submission under, even if we don't like them, even if we don't think they are righteous people? And I think it really boils down to this one message. If we respect God, we will respect them. And if we respect God, we will obey them with an important caveat. We will obey them insofar as our submission and obedience honors God. Right? Obviously, if a leader, a boss, political leader, whatever, tells you to do something that you know God doesn't want you to do, we have no part in that. That's not what the message is saying. But our obedience and our respect that we show to those positions that God has instituted is part of the way we show reverence to God, because we recognize that God is behind the institution of all these things. So, one of the things I get from that, by the way, is that the explanation, because I'm the Father, is a valid explanation, right? Well, why do I have to do it? Because I'm the Father and I said so. Oh, okay. Right? That's a good enough reason sometimes. In any case, when we talk about reverence for God, of course it's more than just how you treat your leaders. It's more than that. We look at what the Bible says, and I'm going to look at a few different aspects of reverence, right? Reverence is demonstrated in our speech, right? Exodus chapter 20, verse 7 says, "Do not take the name of the Lord your God in vain." Right? God will not hold guiltless the one who does. We think about 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 16, which talks about or warns against irreverent babble that just leads to more ungodliness. That idea of irreverent babble, talk that shows a lack of reverence to God. Stop the OMGs, right? We can either choose to revere God with our speech, or we can be irreverent with our speech. We have a choice. Reverence is demonstrated through our physical depictions of God. Exodus chapter 20, verse 4, one of the 10 Commandments is a warning against making graven or carved images of God, of anything that is in heaven, anything that is under the earth, anything like that. Because anytime we try to depict God especially, we are not, just like the Orthodox Jewish tradition of the G-D. It's a similar idea. Anytime we try to depict God with our physical limitations, we cannot properly conceive any sort of portrayal that gives justice to who God is. We don't demonstrate the glory of God to the level of glory He has, right? We fall short, and our depictions fall short. Our reverence is demonstrated through our reverent worship. I'll read this to you from Hebrews chapter 12, verses 28-29. Therefore, let us be grateful for receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, and thus let us offer to God acceptable worship with reverence and awe, for our God is a consuming fire. Reverence is demonstrated through our fear in God's presence. I think about Moses standing before the burning bush in Exodus chapter 3, verses 2 through 6. Moses sees this bush that's on fire but not being consumed. And we see that God is calling to Moses out of the bush. He calls to Moses, 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 here I am, Lord. Take the sandals off your feet, for the ground on which you are standing is holy. I am the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And then it says at the very end of that passage in verse 6, and Moses hid his face, for he was afraid. We have good reason to be afraid in God's presence. There's more to that we're not going to get too deep into right now, but we need to have respect and reverence in God's presence. Moses was told to take the sandals off his feet, for the ground on which he was standing is holy. And if you think about God's presence today, it's not in the temple anymore. It's in us. And so when we talk about revering God in His presence, we're really talking about God's presence in our own bodies, and the fact that if we're going to show reverence to God, we need to respect our own bodies. We need to show reverence to the bodies which God has given us, the bodies in which God Himself dwells. Reverence really is about obeying God in every aspect of life. It's about showing a respect for God's design, for God's commands. So, every day, you're going to have a choice between attacking Saul and cutting off a corner of the robe, between reverence and irreverence, respect and defiance, obedience and sin, life and death, eternity and condemnation. And I implore you to just cut the corner off. A life not patterned after God's design anyway is doomed to fail, not only eternally, but even now. Well, before we close out, I want to remind you about the resources that we help offer. If you have any questions or anything you'd like to learn, these workbooks are a good way to get started. We call it the Bible Correspondence Course offered by the World Bible School. If you want to participate in this, you need a Bible. If you don't have one already, we offer them totally free of charge. It's a ESV hardcover. We offer it in both regular print and large print. The contact info is on the screen. If you have any questions or want to contact a specific congregation in the area, you can go to letthebiblespeak.net. You can also listen to this on our podcast, Let the Bible Speak UP. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. I pray that you have a wonderful week. May God bless you in all that you do.
Glory blaze, Spirit blaze, set our hearts on fire. Flow, river flow, flood the nations with grace and mercy. Send forth your word, Lord, and let there be